biodiversity.
Alright, so what is biodiversity? We just quickly talked about this because of our lab. What did I tell you guys that biodiversity was? Lots of different life, absolutely. Anything else? Any other thoughts besides a lot of different life? What else could biodiversity be? So I like what we heard from Kate. So biodiversity is a lot of different life, but it's in a specific area. So the variety and variability of life on Earth and the ecological complexes of which they are part. You don't have to write this down word for word, it's not in blue. So just remember, only blue stuff are we writing down. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of habitats for ecosystems. So biodiversity really is a global thing, but it changes from place to place. So, what is biodiversity? Today, a total of 1.3 million species have been identified and described, but the truth is that many more live on Earth. All of the animals that we have identified, there are hundreds, if not millions of more animals out there that we have not discovered, either in the bottom of the ocean, in different forests, in areas that we haven't even explored yet. So there is a lot of life here on the Earth. So a tremendous variety of life on Earth is made possible by evolutionary processes and by the complex interactions between species and their environment. So this is what I want you to write down. Remember, blue is stuff we're actually writing down. So the term biodiversity from biological diversity, big science, refers to the variety of life on Earth and at all of its levels. So diversity of plants, diversity of herbivores, diversity of omnivores, diversity of carnivores, all of those things. The better it is to respond to stressors and to recover from disruption. So the ecosystem that we chose, the Dry Creek Park, how biodiverse was it really? Not very, right? We saw like 6 different plant species. We had tree saplings, grass, clover, dead weeds, and like that pink weed. So we had different species there, but is Dry Creek Park an actual like undisturbed biome? No, right? It's definitely, people have been there, we planted the grass is not naturally occurring there. And so would you say that that ecosystem is healthier or less healthy? Exactly. And the only reason that it's healthy right now is because we are mediating it. We are watering it, we are caring for it, we are keeping it in the way that we want it. If we were to stop doing that, the ecosystem would actually revert back to the original ecosystem. Plants that are more suited to live there would live there and thrive. Remember, survival of the fittest, natural selection. And those that weren't, like grass, would die out. So the first type of biodiversity we're going to talk about is genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is the variety that are found in species. So the best way to kind of bring this to your guys' thoughts is that dogs are all the same species. Any dog can reproduce with any other dog, and they will have a viable offspring that can reproduce. That is what a species is. A species is any animal that can reproduce successfully and have offspring that can also reproduce. So a liger is not a species, a mule is not a species. A growler bear, I would defend, is a species. Have you guys heard of that? Did I talk about that last time? Oh my gosh, okay. Growler bears, this is a thing. So because biomes are changing, because of global warming, a lot of biomes are shrinking or they are like meshing together. And so grizzly bears and polar bears have started to mate and their offspring are completely fertile. They can reproduce. So it's called a growler bear. So like it breaks my mind because I'm like, that means that a polar bear and a grizzly bear are the same species. Like what? I know, my mind is like completely blown. I think about that when I'm trying to go to sleep at night and I'm like, growler bears. Anyway, so these dogs dog, we have a Labrador. So this shows a lot of genetic diversity in this species, right? So they have lots of different genes. The same can be said about the human population. We have a lot of genetic diversity. If you look at the human population as a whole, because we are all the same species, humans can reproduce each other and their offspring are fertile. So we are all the same species, but we have a lot of different genes in it. So genetic diversity is the measure of the gene variation among the individuals in the population. But there are two things that can kind of throw genetic diversity off, and those two things are the bottleneck effect and the founder effect. Bottleneck effect. So it says occurs when a population size is reduced for at least one generation. So for example, if there was a natural disaster and only those that live in this classroom, only us, we are the surviving population, how many genes are we going to be killing out of the human population? A lot, right? A lot. So, I mean, we'll keep the red-haired gene. We got a couple of redheads in here, so that's good. Who here has naturally curly hair? Okay, so we got a couple of naturally curly hair people. We'll keep that gene in the population. How many lefties do we have in here? All right, cool. We have a fair amount of lefties. So our left-handed population is going to go way high, because usually in population, lefties are not that common. So we're gonna have a lot of lefties. Does anybody in here speak a different language? Okay, what do you speak? Chinese. Anybody besides Chinese? Spanish. Okay. Anybody else speak anything besides Chinese, Spanish, and English? What do you speak? Japanese. Yeah. French. Okay. So we're gonna take our global communication and we're gonna break it down into 5 languages. That's all that'll be left over. So the bottleneck effect just states that when a natural disaster happens or a small population only survives, that all of the genes are going to be pruned down to that population. That the population that comes afterwards is, like for our classroom, is going to be a left-handed, 5-language speaking, but English primarily, redheaded, curly, still in the population group, right? That's what we're going to have. We're not going to have, let's see, what are some genes that we don't have in here? We're not going to have any dwarfism. That's going to be out of the population. Do we have any type 1 diabetics in here? Okay, type 1 diabetes, gone. Do we have anybody who, I'm not trying to think of other, anybody has 6 fingers? It's a real thing, polydactyly. Okay, cool, so everyone's going to have exactly 5 fingers, so that's cool. So we would expect that the new population, because the genes have been so greatly modified, to only have what is there from the surviving population. So before I move on, can I get like thumbs up, thumbs size, thumbs down? How are we feeling about bottleneck effect? That you understand that it happens when a population is greatly broken down, there's only a small group that survives, and those that are coming from that group are going to have the same genes as the surviving ones. Okay, beautiful. So that is going to greatly change genetic diversity. That's going to take our big genetic diversity and make it really small. The next one kind of goes along same idea, and it's called the founder effect. So even before you start taking notes, everyone put your pencil down for a second. This is going to help you understand this really well, because here in Utah we have a good analogy for this. So, the pioneers, what religious affiliation did they have? Catholic. Oh, yeah. Woo! Never heard that one before. All right, so like LDS, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? What is the most prominent religion in Utah? The same exact one, right? That is founder effect. So whenever a new group starts colonizing in a location, everybody else is going to have the same genes as that group. So remember we had our islands right here. We did our island biodiversity and we threw cotton balls and paper clips and buttons and things like that. So the islands that only had clothespins on them, we would expect to find more clothespins on those islands because they're going to be reproducing and having more clothespins. You wouldn't expect to find cotton balls, you wouldn't expect to find paper clips, you wouldn't expect to find beans. And that's what founder effect is. Founder effect is whatever group is the first in an area, the population is largely going to have those traits. So, for example, I told you polydactyly, real thing. An Amish community was founded by a small number of colonists. The founding group possessed the gene for polydactyly, where you have extra fingers and extra toes. So the Amish population has increased in size, but has remained genetically isolated as few outsiders become part of the population. As a result, polydactyly is much more frequent in the Amish community than in other communities. So if you are Amish, it is more likely that you're going to have a sixth finger or a sixth toe than any other population because of founder effect. So do me a favor, turn to somebody next to you and describe both bottleneck and founder effect. Bottleneck effect well. Alright, Annika, you've been selected by your partner.
I said when a population size is reduced, it there's a lot less genetic variation.
Perfect. So when a population size is reduced, and there's a lot less genetic variation. Love it. Okay, who had a really good example of founder effect? Let's do this side of the classroom since we have somebody from over there.
I think Rachel did.
Rachel, okay, cool. Kennedy just can hear from across the classroom and has chosen Rachel. It's okay to phone a friend if you need to.
Kennedy.
Okay, Kennedy, back to you.
I think really really good. Well, I just used the Amish.
Perfect. So which is, just reiterate it in your own words. You can also phone a friend. I can explain it. Okay, so founder effect is where the population is going to be very similar to the group that founded the area. So the group that was first there, the population is going to have the same genes. So we're going to go back through our line. So, Brinley, founder effect. Now that I've said it out loud, put it in your own words.
That like the people who found it, most important like that.
Perfect. Okay, Kennedy, founder effect. Your own words.
The people that were there first, it's like their genes.
Perfect. Okay, Rachel, founder effect. Your own words.
The people that come and do it first, it's like their own stuff.
Perfect. Okay, love it. There we go. Founder effect. So now we're going to talk about more diversity. Next, we have species diversity. Remember, nothing's in blue, so you don't need to write this down. So we're starting with small diversity, and then we're getting bigger. So we're talking about genetic diversity in a population. Now we're talking about species diversity, so we're going to have different species. So elephants, zebras, wildebeest, mongoose, hippos, acacia trees, various grasses, and who knows how many insects all come together in the watering hole in Tanzania during a drought in an ecosystem. So there we ideas: species richness and species evenness. So when we were talking about our transect lab, we were focusing on one thing, and we were focusing on species richness, or the number of species in a community, right? We were like, oh, there is grasses, there are clovers, there are tree saplings, there are leaves. So that is talking about species richness. How many different species are we seeing? However, we can also look at a population based on species evenness, or how many of each of those species are actually there. Like, do we only have one sapling? How many clovers do we have? Are they all even? Is there a greater abundance of one species over another species? So that is something we have to look at as well when we're talking about biodiversity. Bless you. Alright, so we're going to skip this. Looking at these two communities, which community has more species richness, and which community has more species evenness? Remember, species richness just means total number of species. Species evenness means that there's about equal numbers of these species. So turn to somebody next to you and decide which one has better species richness and which one has better species evenness.
Okay, evenness is 2 and richness is 1.
What animal is in one?
It's more about like spreading it out, you know. I don't think it's about different animals not being in the others.
Not what
No.
the number of species in an area.
No.
What was the question?
No.
So which one has more species richness? So greater number of species, and which one has better species evenness, or like a better number
No, I
of
mean,
species?
like, I think what she's talking about is like, there's so many elephants in community 1, so it's more rich. I think that's what she's saying. I think the iPad can help hear our whole conversation.
I bet.
Alright, Isaac, here in 3, 2, 1. Isaac and Dylan, I heard a really good conversation back there. What were you guys talking about between these two communities? Like, how did you come up with your ideas?
We were arguing.
I love it. Let's hear it. Let's hear the argument, and then we can ask the class.
Well, I was just wondering because like the number of species in both areas, like I never found a species that wasn't there, but he was saying that I guess that makes sense because there's more elephants in community 1, so that one's less.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it kind of was a trick question. You guys totally got it. Both of these have the same species richness, right? We have elephants, hippos, wolves, gazelles, giraffes, and lions, right? 6 species. Over here, we have lion, elephants, giraffe, hippo, gazelle, wolf, and what am I missing? Gazelle? Did I do that one?
Lion.
Oh, elephant. I missed elephant. Okay, so we have 6 species in both of these, so they actually are the same species richness. Both have 6 total species. When we look at species evenness, species 1, or community 1, is not very even. We have 1 hippo. What happens if that hippo is endangered at all? Like, or if someone decides to hunt it, which don't ever hunt hippos. They're like the most deadly thing ever. They kill so many people. Don't do it. But yeah, like if there's only 1, they're not going to reproduce, so we're not going to have a population that's going to die out. Whereas over here we have 3 different hippos. And we have 4 elephants. So when we're looking at a population, it's actually really important to have really good species evenness, because that is going to create a healthy population of each of these species. Whereas if we don't have very good species evenness, we'd expect for those species to die out over time. If anything ever came that was competing with those species, they would be gone really, really quickly. So we've talked about genetic diversity, we've talked about species diversity, now we're going to talk about habitat diversity. And And we also saw this in our transect lab as well, that our habitat was not very diverse. Like, we had water in it, but I mean, that was basically it. So, habitat diversity is the vertical and horizontal distribution of plants influences habitat structure. So basically, the distribution of different plants in a habitat. The more diverse the habitat is, the more species richness we can have because more species can live in that habitat. The height, openness, and density of vegetation, as well as the specific habitat features, for example, trees, are key aspects of animal habitat within an ecosystem. So again, the big idea of habitat diversity is the more diverse the habitat, the more diverse the species, the more diverse the species, the more biodiversity, the healthier the ecosystem is. So our transect line really was a horizontal distribution. We had a line running through an ecosystem, and we were looking at the biodiversity along that line. So in this ecosystem, it's actually diverse. We have trees, we have shrubs, we have water animals, and different breeds over here, and so we have a lot of different places that animals can be living and thriving. So, when we look at Salt Lake City, habitat diversity, we have buildings, right? We have quarries, mines, roads, pavers, buildings. Aquatic, we have wetlands, streams and rivers, ponds and reservoirs, sewage and water treatment. And for green, we have parks, cemeteries, golf courses, lawns and gardens, playing fields, street trees, woodlands and shrublands. And then for waste, we have brownfields and landfills. So we actually have a big diversity in Salt Lake City, even though it's not all natural. Like, unnatural diversity still brings different species. You don't have to write this down, this is basically something we just talked about. The more types of habitat and ecosystem, the more species can inhabit that ecosystem, and species diversity is higher in complex environments. Like we said, the more diverse an ecosystem is, the more diverse you're gonna have for your species and the healthier it's going to be. So, when we lose habitat, we are actually going to be losing our species. So we talked about generalist and specialist species for a brief second, right? Have you heard those words? Okay. So, specialist species are species that are very well rooted in where they live. They can only live in very small areas. They need specific resources. They can't move from area to area. Generalist species are animals that can live basically anywhere. There's nothing that really holds them back. So when we have habitat loss, we're going to have specialist species die off first because they can only live in that specific habitat. General species are going to do better because they can live generally anywhere. They're not going to be that displaced by species or by habitat loss. raccoons are just gonna come and steal the cat food. Like, they can thrive no matter what's happening. Okay, cool. We have 3 more things to write down and we're done with notes for today. So, talking about diversity, disturbances are things that can disrupt diversity, right? So, any event that is caused by a physical, chemical, or biological agents that results in changes in a population size or community composition in ecosystem. So, disturbance really is just anything that changes an ecosystem because of its actions. So, it could be a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, a flood, a rock slide, a mudslide, even maybe just walking away from you. You're the winner of this paper. Congratulations. All these things are disturbances and they can and do affect ecosystems and their biodiversity. So indicator species are species that start to die off first when we have a disturbance. They're the things that first tell us that an ecosystem is getting unhealthy. So for example, if there was any kind of pollution in the waterways, we would expect to see lichens and tadpoles start to die off first because they are more specialized to their environment, and so any little change affects them. And so if they start dying off, we'd be like, oof, we're gonna expect bigger dying offs. We're gonna expect a lot more damage to be coming down the pipeline because these species are telling us that things are starting to get out of hand. Last but not least, these are our last notes for today. Actually, no, those were the last notes for today. Haha, even better. Okay, so leave your notebooks out. We're not taking any more notes, but I am going to be doing an activity to replace taking notes because taking notes is boring.